The Norden Bombsight was one of the most closely held classified projects America was working on in the 1930s. It promised to deliver bombs released at high altitudes onto targets with unprecedented accuracy. Now, the Wright brothers had only first flown less than 30 years previously, but aircraft design and construction were advancing in leaps and bounds as nations sought to gain a decisive technological supremacy. These evolving military aircraft were an immediate threat to all nations, as they could easily fly over borders and armies and drop bombs almost with impunity. The First World War introduced the entire world to their vulnerability to air attacks, and countermeasures were immediately introduced. Anti-aircraft artillery was developed to engage these first bombers at altitude, and in response, bombers were designed to fly higher, while fighters were developed to attack incoming bomber aircraft. Bombers were also fitted with machine guns to defend themselves and, where range permitted, escorted by friendly fighters. Except the accuracy of bombs dropped from altitude was very poor. Though they could often hit targets well beyond the range of artillery, their accuracy left much to be desired. It was the equivalent of a sniper shot from 2 miles away, and the ability of these bombers to damage tactical or strategic targets was severely limited, at least during the Great War. When the war ended on November 11, 1918, every country with an air force continued to research and develop more and better designed fighters and bombers. Fighters increased in speed, maximum altitude, and offensive armament. Bombers increased their speed, maximum altitude, defensive armament, and payload capacity. Even Germany, with the restrictions placed on it by the Treaty of Versailles, found ways to circumvent legal obstacles. Aircraft that could drop bombs evolved into 2 distinct types based on the method for delivering their payload. The dive bomber that could make a steep downward attack, drop a smaller load of bombs with an acceptable degree of accuracy, and level or horizontal bombers that would fly level over a target and release their larger payload. These higher altitude bombers found that dropping their bombs with any accuracy was problematic, and soon there was a separate arms race to develop an accurate high-level bomb sight that could calculate altitude, ballistic fall rate, and wind drift. Carl Norden, a Dutch engineer and naturalized American citizen, spent years building, tweaking, improving his designs until it resulted in the Mark 15 bomb sight, which, when combined with a gyroscopically stabilized autopilot, promised exceptional accuracy. In 1938, the Royal Air Force became aware of the project and requested access, but was refused by the U.S. government, who was reticent to share this technology with any nation, even an allied one. What few knew was that Hitler's National Socialist Germany had already stolen the plans. In 1937, Nicholas Ritter was recruited by the Abwehr, the German counterintelligence service that was founded in 1921. The Treaty of Versailles that ended the Great War authorized Germany a self-defensive counterintelligence service only, but that did not stop the Abwehr from collecting foreign intelligence. Nicholas Adolf Fritz Ritter was the prototypical intelligence officer with a military background, civilian business experience, competent fluency in the English language, and experience living abroad. A graduate of a Prussian military academy and veteran of the First World War, he attended a business college after the war and managed a textile plant in Silesia, Germany, with over 200 employees. In 1924, with the failing German economy overwhelmed by hyperinflation, Ritter, now 24 years old, moved to the United States, eventually married an Alabama girl, and settled in New York City, where he lived for 12 years. In 1936, Ritter received a personal invitation via Friedrich von Bodecker, Hitler's military attaché in Washington, D.C., with a proposition from the German Armed Forces High Command. Ritter was fully supportive of Hitler's rise to power and gathered his family and moved them to Germany. Before the year was out, he was living in Bremen and serving on active duty as a staff officer for the Wehrmacht. The next year, he was recruited into the Abwehr and began his training for Abwehrstelle Hamburg, the Abwehr office tasked with acquiring relevant military secrets from both Great Britain and the United States. In November 1937, after divorcing his American wife and sending her packing, he departed for his first intelligence trip to America with orders directly from Abwehr Chief Admiral William Canaris to build up an organization by identifying contacts and recruiting agents. As a bonus, one of his fellow officers gave him a specific contact, a New Yorker nicknamed Pop, who had previously sent documents that were so technical that the Luftwaffe wasn't able to decipher them. In preparing for this mission, Ritter had spent time visiting various German factories producing material for the German military to better understand the current state of German technology, and he was intrigued by Pop's note that the indecipherable blueprints were immensely valuable to a Germany intent on rearming itself. Ritter traveled in true name, but after a few days in New York, checked into a new hotel using the alias Alfred Landing. His first stop was to see Pop, whose full name was Friedrich Sohn, a stocky middle-aged man who was employed by Carl L. Norden Inc., who was producing what the U.S. military considered to be the most important secret project under development, now known as the Norden Bombsight. Norden's weakness was that he favored German-American employees trained in the European apprentice system, and Pop's Sohn was one of these vulnerabilities. He and Ritter met at Pop's apartment in Queens, where Ritter learned that the blueprints had come from a coworker named Paul, who worked on the 16th floor of 80 Lafayette Street, where the bombsights received their final assembly. Ritter was well aware that current German bombsights failed to measure up, and thus were a top priority for German industry. Here was a chance to solve that problem for the Luftwaffe. He requested a face-to-face meeting with Paul. A few days later, he met Paul, whose true name was Hermann W. Lang, an avowed Nazi whose pedigree could be traced back to his participation in Hitler's aborted beer hall putsch of 1923. Lang had worked for Norden since 1929 and had been promoted to be one of only 4 assistant inspectors. Lang was also a member of the Deutsche Amerikanische Berufsgemeinschaft, or DAB, a German-American organization which mirrored the workers' leagues back in the fatherland, all unapologetic supporters of Adolf Hitler. You might wonder how such an obvious threat to security could be working at Carl L. Norden Inc. in the first place, and the answer is simple. America was woefully naive. The United States had only a few intelligence services, and all were both underfunded and undermanned. The Office of Naval Intelligence conducted normal intelligence gathering activities but lacked the personnel and the experience to run a basic counterintelligence operation. The Army's Military Intelligence Division, G2 personnel in the 2nd Corps area of responsibility that included all of New York, New Jersey, and Delaware, consisted of 1 officer and 2 assistants. The Federal Bureau of Investigation could open a counterintelligence investigation with the specific request of the Army, Navy, or State Department, which didn't happen often, and only rarely could they open one on their own initiative. Because of these restrictions, the FBI had little experience in even conducting this type of investigation that required long hours of surveillance against targets that were specifically conducting counter-surveillance. The Soviets were so cocky, justifiably so, that they joked they could carry signs identifying themselves as spies and never be arrested. The reality was that Americans were barely looking, and few, if any, businesses that produced material for the U.S. military even had security offices that would investigate their own employees. Background investigations that are routine today did not even exist back then. It was a complete free-for-all, and we'll probably never know all of the secrets that were stolen by both allies and enemies. America was oblivious. As Ritter met with Lang, he found a willing participant, a German citizen fully prepared to spy for his native fatherland. Lang described how he smuggled out blueprints at the end of his shift and copied them by hand at home after his wife had gone to sleep, then returned the originals in the morning without anyone the wiser. Lang refused payment and gave Ritter all of the blueprints he had copied so far and promised more. A few days later, these documents were smuggled out by an Abwehr courier, a member of a German-flagged passenger liner. 1 month later, his mission complete, Ritter returned to Germany, and Lang's regularly delivered blueprints found their way to the Luftwaffe's technical office in Berlin. This technical office evaluated the blueprints and sent a note to Herr Nicholas Ritter explaining that they were worthless fabrications and that Ritter was being swindled. For the Luftwaffe, there were several reasons they believed this. First, the blueprints were extremely complicated and no one could make heads or tails of them. Second, the notion that an average machinist in New York suddenly found the solution to one of Germany's most critical intelligence requirements was just not believable. But perhaps the biggest reason was that the Luftwaffe was going in a different direction. Hermann Göring, the head of the Luftwaffe, had appointed Ernest Udet, a highly respected ace from the First World War, as the head of the technical office. Udet was focusing on dive bombing, vice horizontal bombing. He believed that highly skilled pilots performing a steep dive would produce better results than a high-altitude bomber. The first required only skill and a modified gun sight as they were dropping bombs from a few hundred feet, vice a level bomber dropping from tens of thousands of feet that required a highly complex bomb sight that had yet to be proved, let alone invented. The Luftwaffe had already shelved their plans for a high-altitude 4-engine heavy bomber and instead focused on their iconic Junkers 87 Sturzkampfflugzeug or Stuka dive bomber. Horizontal bombing was only employed by medium 2-engine bombers such as the Heinkel 111 or the Dornier 17. Udet's logic was practical. Dive bombers such as the Stuka were significantly more accurate in their delivery than the medium bombers employed at that time. The Luftwaffe's previous experience in Spain with their Condor Legion only confirmed this tactical focus. But Ritter disagreed with the letter from the technical office telling him he had been scammed, as he believed in the value of Lang's reporting and understood the Luftwaffe's need for an accurate bomb sight. He also knew that Lang was not financially motivated, as he had been offended and refused the money Ritter had offered. Ritter flew to Berlin and met with Friedrich Grosskopf, the officer in charge of the Abwehr Division for the Luftwaffe. He convinced Grosskopf that the blueprints were so revolutionary that they were beyond the technical office's ability to comprehend. Ritter asked instead for the head specialist working on German-designed bomb sights. This sent him to Frankfurt, where he met Professor Wolfram Eisenlohr, the director of the Department for Engines and Accessories within the technical office. Ritter related the entire background of Lang and his Norden blueprints to Eisenlohr, and waited patiently while the professor carefully examined the blueprints. The professor finally looked up, declaring them invaluable, and asked for as many blueprints as possible, as quickly as possible. Back in New York, Lang continued to copy blueprints at night at his kitchen table and passed them to Pop Sohn, who gave them to Abwehr couriers to smuggle to Germany. In the spring of 1938, Hermann Lang and his wife were invited to Germany to meet with the technical office, proving Ritter had been right all along. Supposedly Lang was shown a German bomb sight built with the input from all of the blueprints he had supplied. His trip complete, he returned to New York, and 2 weeks after resuming work at Carl L. Norden Inc., he brazenly submitted his paperwork to become a naturalized citizen. The truth was that the Luftwaffe never fully exploited what they learned from the Norden blueprints. Besides the focus on dive bombers, which didn't require a complicated bomb sight, the Luftwaffe's technical office never prioritized how to incorporate their windfall technical intelligence into the bomb sights employed by the Heinkel 111, Dornier 117, and Junkers 88 medium bombers. Hitler needed his bombers now, not in another year or two. In the end, the successes of their intelligence service could not overcome an overwhelming bureaucracy overpopulated with uninspired bureaucrats, or Hermann Göring's numerous lies to Hitler hiding the weaknesses and shortcomings of the Luftwaffe. As for Hermann Lang, he was arrested in the FBI's largest counter-espionage case in American history, and only days after Pearl Harbor and a mere hours after Hitler declared war on the United States, he was found guilty of espionage and sentenced to 18 years in prison. And Nicholas Ritter? He was bounced from the Abwehr for unwittingly recruiting a double agent, another German-American who it turned out was true and faithful to his adopted country, and who, working with the FBI, was the American hero that sent over 30 Nazi spies to prison. But that is another story.